Misanthrope's lecture unannounced.
Kit in the Mystic Forest, Act 2A, The Forest and the Cure, Part 13, Bailey's Satchel. The lure of the forest was quite strong for the kid petite. She seemed caught in a daze, and in truth, she might have wandered endlessly if not for the fact that she had just stumbled over something that, much like her, was not of this forest. It was her father's satchel. She surveyed the area, but nothing was peculiar aside from that bag. No signs of a tussle or even a sleeping man. Kit checked the inside of Bailey's satchel to find that he had obtained 2 more of the items, a swirling ball of frozen sun, as well as some fine white hairs from a creature unknown, possibly the stallion of the wind. But how was she to really know? The girl, mind once more focused, decided to look for the last 2 ingredients. She'll look for a tree which talked, then find some fairies of the forest. The spring, she thought, would probably be the easiest thing to find, so she'll look for that last. She hoped her father Bailey would be somewhere on the way. Part 14, Knock Knock, Hello. Not knowing how else to find a talking tree, Kit went up to every tree she saw and gave it a polite knock knock and asked very sweetly, "Hello, can you talk?" Part 15, Hobbling About. While hopping from tree to tree, she came across an area with a great many birds chirping in the sky. This perplexed the little Kit until she looked down. A single bird was there hobbling about. This bird, we'll call Archer, was grounded, it seemed, wing broken. Archer could not fly home. His friends could only peck at foes or chirp for help. They were all too small themselves to do any more. Archer was stuck, but Kit sought to help. Part 16, To Let Be. Gesturing to the birds above to have faith in her goodwill, Kit moved towards Archer to pick him up. At first, the birds chirped louder, circled faster, but when they saw the gentle look in her eyes, their sharp chirps became light songs. They pointed out old Archer's nest by circling a giant tree. But just as Kit was putting Archer in her satchel, a booming voice told her not to help. It was the tree. It was Archer's tree that was making the earth shake with its voice so loud. Again, it warned the tiny child, proclaiming that the way of the forest was not to help, but to let be. Part 17, Please Do Not Sneeze. When the tree ceased speaking, all became silent. The earth became stable and the wind died down. And though birds still circled round, none dared sing song. Indeed, the tree commanded all, both beasts and nature. However, though very, very scared, the daughter of Bailey, child of Lorelais, would not be commanded by a tree, not for a vice which she believed wrong. Kit picked up Archer and placed him in her satchel. She told the tree to not sneeze and proceeded to climb it all the way up to its very tip top. Well, perhaps not that high, as the nest was actually slightly lower. It was a long climb up either way, and very tiring too, but the girl did make it up and returned the bird to his home. Part 18, Cursed Woods. When Kit was done with the bird named Archer, she climbed down from the tree, touched foot on earth. She thanked the tree for not sneezing and waited in silence for a reply. In a big voice that reverberated the air, the tree talked, though this time his voice wasn't full of command. Nothing shook, and the fear it had brought before was no longer there. The tree had only this to say: "Child of valor, your heart is sound, but this forest is cursed. Leave at once, child, for your own sake, not mine." Kit, as immediately as the tree had finished, started to explain. Her mother was ill and her father lost. She made it clear that she could not leave and instead asked the tree for help. Part 19, A Task Completed. The tree could tell by her actions previous and eyes determined that though this girl was little, with mind growing, she was not acting out of thoughtlessness or folly, but out of love and determination. With a deep and heavy sigh, the tree complied with her wishes, allowing her to take from his body a task completed. The tree, called Solomon, also gave the girl his name, as well as a flute quite literally rustled up from its leaves. Wanting her to make haste, it gave her the location of the spring and said that the flute would summon the fairies and that its name would make sure they helped. Kit thanked the talking tree Solomon and made haste to her next destination. Part 20, The Spring. Upon her destination reached, she inhaled real big and blew her fleur leaves as hard as she could. A slight dizziness overcame her. She'll remember to catch her breath first next time. At first, nothing came, so she blew it again, and on second turn she saw something quite strange. Tiny footprints danced across the water, and laughter soon filled the air. Leaves started to rustle, and other noises could be heard. A party had started, yet not a body could be found. Curious. Part 21, Invisible, Mischievous Sprites. Perhaps they were shy, Kit thought. No, too much fun was being had, she concluded. Perhaps they were invisible, Kit thought again. Yes, that must be it, she concluded. That was a reason for the flute, she assumed. Kit took out the flute and blew it once more, though with much less gusto than before, and called the fairies to help. When this was done, the invisible sprites came quick and floated the girl into the air. They took her bag and stole her flute, laughing and giggling all the while. Kit pleaded with them to stop, but they would listen not. That is, until she name-dropped the name of Solomon, which caused the mischievous fairies to drop the girl ground floor hard, sorry. One fairy visified to verify, "You must mean the great tree of Eisweirth, Solomon." Part 22, Conditions 2. The small child replied that she did not know his full title, but it was a talking tree with a voice so bold and strong that it could shake the ground and stop wind. And with that fact known, one by one, fairies started to visify in front of the girl Kit. The position now changed. It was the mischievous Sprites who now pleaded to Kit, pleaded with her not to tell the great tree Solomon of their bad doings. Kit responded quick, saying she would consider their prayers on conditions too. First, she requested that the fairies bless some water from the spring, for her mother was very sick and no doubt worsening. Second, she inquired, "Tell me about 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐿, for it is my mother's maiden name. She is, or rather was, Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿 IV before she married my father." The fairies, in gasps simultaneous, showed their stun. They huddled up together and whispered among themselves, occasionally peeking back at the girl or circling around her. The curious ongoings were much too curious indeed. Just as Kit's fascination reached its peak and she started to move towards them, the fairy called Evermore announced to all that the girl christened Kit, wide-eyed and small, daughter of an 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿, was in fact a fairy, at least a little. Part 23, Lorelais of 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. Stunned was Kit by Evermore's proclamation of her fairy heritage. So stunned, in fact, that it gave Evermore the opportunity to tell the girl a story. One of the far, very far off land of 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. It was the story of the great and noble lineage of fairy women, all bearing the name of Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. The first of whom had ended a terrible war of humans and fairies in 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿, bringing a peace to the land. She married a human who became king to her queen and had a daughter. This one became Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿 II. It can be assumed that the first was a little vain. Lorelais II grew up first princess of 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿, beautiful yet cunning. She learned of an imbalance of nature in the world's temporal and inferior. With her mother's help, she devised a way to fix the calamity, at least in the land 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. In years forward, she too would fall in love and bring forth a third Lorelais of 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿. It can be assumed that the second wanted to start a tradition. The third, much like petite little Kit, was small in size with heart big and resolve great. And like her grandmother, Lorelais I, this Lorelais was a soldier for her land, though she was able to resolve many conflicts with Sodom fight. Detesting killing, she fought to unite the world, and in a far-off place, across sea and mountains many, she did in fact succeed. And with what had become tradition, Lorelais III would name her daughter Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐿𝐿 IV. It was well known that the third just wasn't very creative naming-wise. Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐿𝐿 IV, last in the line and furthest removed biologically from her fairy blood, was the strongest of the Lorelais in her arcane. So strong, in fact, that she could feel the imbalances of nature in far, very far off lands, and left 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿 to mend them herself. Part 24, The Legend 3, Can you feel it? Evermore's tale had ended. She had told all that was known. What had happened to Lorelais 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿 IV after she left was a mystery to all. Though, there was a little more. One last thing that was known. A long, very long time ago, in this very forest, a great imbalance did arise. It grew and wouldn't stop, eventually swallowing a nearby town. No one thought the calamity would end, but then one day, from right within the forest, the very center of this wood, came a strong and powerful arcane that bathed the world in light. It greatly weakened the imbalance and forced it back into the forest. It was never known who or what resolved the issue, just that the outside was saved and the forest had changed evermore. At last, it seemed the town, fearful of another calamity, had caused something very disturbing to awaken. What? The fairies did not know, but its immature power could be felt. The imbalance of nature was growing yet again. They asked her, "Can you feel it?" Part 25, In Agreement. The fairies and Kit were in agreement. Lorelais of his wife, fourth in a great line, must be saved. Kit opened her satchel, took out an empty container, and filled it with fresh water from the spring. The fairies blessed it. Once done, the fairies surrounded Kit and sealed her in light shining. They told her not to fret, for the light was simply a teleportation arcane. In seconds, she would be at her next destination, the altar. They told her, ears up, for a test would be forthcoming. If she wanted to return, the arcane she would repeat, 𝐿𝐿 Sanitos, would get her back here in a jiff. And with that, Kit the Kid had vanished. Part 26, Altar. In a ball of light swirling, Kit had arrived somewhere deep in the forest, to a place full of half-sunken structures and moss-covered stairs leading to heaven, or maybe nowhere. The place seemed mystical to Kit, as if from a distant time, and it also seemed to her to fit just perfectly right here in this forest. In the back of it all was a solitary structure that was perfectly intact, almost out of time from the rest of this place. That structure was the altar. Grand and jeweled the altar was. Kit marveled as she ran towards its splendor. Though before she could reach its tall doors, an elderly man took notice of her and inquired a strange query. He asked,
"Excuse me, dear girl, which way is up?"
He stumbled, dazed, confused, lost, and wandered right off before the girl could give answer, which of course she pointed up. Everything was odd about him, from his condition to his book to the way he glowed. Yes, thought Kit, especially the way he glowed. Part 27, Making Magic. Inside, the altar was dark and cold, but this mattered not. Kit, in brilliant focus, opened her father's satchel and took out the items 7, the ingredients in a bowl, and of course, the book of words, and began her work. She started by grinding the bark of the Solomon tree, then adding in the hairs of wind. She poured in the water blessed by the fairies and dropped in the ball of frozen sun, which melted. The frozen sun had thickened the mix and made it both warm and cool to the touch. All steps were being followed in order dictated by the book. Next, the book said, though not out loud, that the altar would glow, and eerily, it did. At last, she added the final ingredients to the mix, bonded blood of love and body. By this time, the book foretold that the mix would change colors from muddy green to a pale red, and that the chamber would become blindingly bright with light. But it didn't. In fact, not only had the paste not changed colors, but the chamber reverted back to its dark and cold state. The situation was Part 28, Bonded Blood. The girl named Kit, recently outed fairy, could not think. She was lost as to what to do next. All she could think to do was pace round and round, and try to figure out what went wrong. Was it the ingredients, or had she mixed them wrong? Her focus was forfeit, and her mind interrupted by thoughts of a worsening mother and of her father lost. Her mind spun round and round, and though she never doubted her father's efforts, she did feel the need to blame those stupid white hairs, the ones of the stallion of the wind. And right as she thought that very last thought, did her petite frame take a tumble, smacking head, flesh to ground hard. A trail of blood ran down her temple and curved along her cheek. If her parents had taught her words foul, now may have been the time she would have used them. However, they did not, so instead, she rolled over and simply touched head. Ow. As her hand, now bloodied, came into view, the girl's mind could clearly make sense of the book's riddle. Bonded blood of body didn't mean for oneself, but of one's lineage. Kit jumped up and slung a heap of her own blood into the bowl, liquid now red and lights most definitely blinding. Kit's mother could now be saved. She packed up her things and 𝐒𝐤𝐤𝐿 out of there. Part 29 of Mad Dash Home. Kit arrived back at the spring and made a mad dash past the fairy's mini, past the bird's high, and past the tree could be talking. She ran without stop all the way back to the forest's entrance, where she smacked into a wall invisible. Strange, she thought. This was not here before. She ran along its perimeter, but it seemed to be all round. She could see Rory, who you may remember is a horse, and gave him a call. But while the steed did rise, he looked as if he could not see the small little child. Her very first thought, of which she had spoken out loud, was, "Have I gotten smaller?" And in reply to this quandary, came a no from behind. Kit turned to see, and see she did, two ghostly apparitions with bodies of men and heads of beasts. They spoke in unison and said to her this: her time in the forest had been too long, and that the forest now claimed her, body, mind, clothes, and all. Kit in the Mystic Forest was written by T.O. Coleman, performed by ''H, with original music remix by Adachi. And as always, we give a very special thanks to our audience for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Next time, Act 2B, The Forest and the Father.